The big thing in the composite family, of course, are lettuces. And there's a whole host of lettuces. Lettuces aren't known for liking summer heat. They're ones that like that cool spring or the cool fall. That being said, there's different varieties that we can choose to plant at different times of the year that will give us a nice quality lettuce at a certain time of year. And this is probably a good point to introduce the idea of succession planting. Who here is familiar with this concept of succession planting? If I say that term, does it looks like probably most of the people, a few people not so much. This is what farmers do. They get their tomatoes started early to get that first one in, but those are probably the only tomatoes he plants. He probably's got field plants, he's got other successions. Succession planting is an idea that you're not just going to go plant all your cucumbers or all your lettuce on the same day and then think that's going to last throughout the period of the season. A lot of the vegetables we grow are annuals, and they have a period of time that they're going to go through a leaf phase, and then a lot of them go through fruit and want to eventually produce seed. So if we can use succession planting, then that might be with lettuces. That means starting some lettuce seeds every 3 or 4 weeks from the first week of April right on through, say, August 1st. What that means is then you don't have this bitterness that we sometimes associate with summertime lettuces. We can have a nice, crisp, even sweet lettuce in the middle of August. We combine succession planting with good variety selection, and that's how we can make it happen. And Johnny's, which is one of the companies, Johnny's Selected Seeds, they're up in Maine. They're one of the ones that's very popular for commercial growers to use. They sell, and there's probably some other seed companies on your list that would carry this variety as well. They sell a variety of lettuce called magenta, which is it's a type of lettuce called a French summer crisp, or Batavia. It's kind of a cross between like an iceberg, because it's got actual crisp, but then it's got flavor that you sometimes don't associate with an iceberg. That magenta is one of the best summer lettuce varieties that you can plant. So a lettuce that you're going to seed maybe in early June that you want to be able to eat in the height of August. Magenta is a really great variety, and I would encourage you guys. A lot of the seed catalogs, one of the nice things about going to seed catalogs, you don't have to necessarily buy seeds from them, but you can get information about what crops are really good for early season, what crops are really good for the middle season, what crops are really good for the late season. A good example of that is an open pollinated lettuce. Black-seeded Simpson is a very common early season lettuce. Grows really quick, under the right conditions can create these massive 2-pound heads. But if you plant that for an August harvest or a September harvest, it's generally going to be kind of wimpy. Doesn't really maximize its growth, and then often gets a bitter flavor that's going to turn people away from the lettuce. The cucurbit family is the family of squash, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins, winter squash. These are the variety of things that if you're not careful and you plant them in your garden, they're going to swallow everything else up, especially if you plant pumpkins or sometimes watermelons. I think one thing to really think about when you're thinking about cucurbits is cucumbers, for example. They're crops that love to climb. If you provide them a trellis that they can climb up, you've suddenly taken something that might take 3 or 4 square feet on the ground and put it up vertically, and you've really freed up a lot of your ground space. So the idea of trellising in a small garden space is really a great way to kind of maximize your production. And cucumbers are one. You can trellis some of those others, but cucumbers are a real common thing to trellis. If anybody's familiar with the English cucumbers you get in the grocery store, the long, skinny cucumbers, most of those are greenhouse grown on trellises, and that's partially what allows them to have such a nice straight growth habit, is the fact that they're allowing a little bit of help from gravity, if you will, to grow out.
Can you do that with the zooks and the summer squash?
In the zooks and summer squash, you're not going to trellis those. Most of those are what are called bush varieties, and they have a tendency just to do this. And so if you put something there, there are a couple, if you wanted to get into it, that you can. Some of the older varieties of zucchini, there's one called Costata romanesca. I think it's an Italian heirloom. And it will, over season, have this leading plant that, wanders through your garden and continue to grow zucchini.
That's what I noticed, is that
And,
they move around.
but then there's also, if you see the word bush variety next to a type of zucchini or squash, that's going to be one that just tends to keep on producing, but doesn't really kind of start wandering through your garden space. So the cucurbitts, it's too early to plant the cucurbitts this time of year. Those are plants that you're going to start your seeds late April, early May if you have a warm spot, or buy your transplants or direct seed them no earlier generally than the middle of May. But if you get started early, you can get your cucumbers in right around July 4th. You can get your summer squash in right around the last week of June. And it's kind of before you're sick of it at that time of the year. It's kind of a blessing to have these squash and cucumbers come in. Certain vegetable crops are planted very frequently at this time of year. The legumes are one of those families. Fava beans and peas. This is the time to put your fava beans and peas in. It's not too early at all. You'd want to avoid it if you had a real wet spot or a shady spot where you think the seed would rot. The temperature of the soil stays cool. But if you have some sun exposure, a well-drained soil, it's definitely not too early to start your fava beans or your peas. It is too early to start your bush beans or your pole beans. Those you want to hold off until about May to plant. Crops, those are the real popular ones, of course, the tomatoes. They're also known as nightshades. Tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, eggplants are all in that family. These are the crops that, hundreds of years ago got a bad rap. Tomatoes were considered poison, weren't necessarily edible. And we now, of course, realize that they're quite tasty. And they do have a toxin in their leaf, and like potatoes have a little bit of it in their skin. Still, I say if you're growing potatoes in good soil, you want to eat your skins. That's where a lot of nutrients are. But if you have a potato that's greening on the skin, it's concentrating that solanaceous toxin. It's the solanines, and you'd have to still eat like 4 pounds of potatoes at one sitting to get to a point where you'd maybe start seeing what that would impact. There are also potatoes and tomatoes are some crops that, for people that have various health reasons, that sometimes a family of crops that don't work well in certain people's digestive systems or just general diets. Tomatoes are worth talking about just briefly. Is there anybody here that'd like to volunteer a favorite tomato variety they've grown in the past? Or
Big
something?
boy.
Big boy. And why do you like Big Boy?
They're just good. They're just juicy and they're firm enough to cut up for like BLTs.
Yep. And tomatoes, there's been this kind of renaissance of heirloom tomatoes or open pollinated tomatoes. And what those are is those are seeds that we can plant, we can save the seed from one year to the next and it would come back true to form. And as opposed to the hybrids, there's a lot of tasty hybrids and very vigorous hybrids. But what happened in the tomato industry over the years is more and more we were breeding on a commercial level for things that could ship from California or from Texas to the Northeast, or things that could handle a supermarket shelf for 2 weeks. So there's varieties like Big Boy, some of the heirloom varieties like the Brandywines are one that are very popular, that their genetics were always about flavor. And consequently, when you bite into one of those tomatoes, it's a completely different experience. And to me, tomatoes are, I only eat tomatoes when they're in season. I don't do them in the greenhouse because I don't have a greenhouse for them, which means for me, my earliest tomatoes will be like cherry tomatoes in second or third week of July, and then August and September is tomato season, and I just kind of eat as much as I can. Tomato sandwiches, that kind of stuff. The one tomato variety if people haven't grown that's I just want to put out there is a variety called Sun Gold. It's a cherry tomato variety, and it has a really, really great prolific production. It's an orange tomato, and it's about one of the sweetest tomatoes. There are a few out there that top it, but it's one of the sweetest tomato varieties that you can grow. And it's a great tomato to introduce to kids. Tomatoes, a lot of kids, they like ketchup. But if you put a fresh tomato in front of them, or you put a tomato into their salad, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to get them to say, yeah, I'm going to try that. Cherry tomatoes are, to me, one of the ones where you're not necessarily going to win their hearts the first time, but slowly over time, it's a tomato that can kind of ease people into the tomato world because it just has such a great sweetness to it.